European borders have changed almost yearly for thousands of years. The past 2 centuries are shown here. Border conflicts have started most wars. When Russian troops crossed Ukraine's border in 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin called it a special military operation to protect persecuted ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. The United States unleashed a massive propaganda campaign to convince everyone that Russia was attempting to conquer all of Ukraine before invading other nations. This channel produced a series of tales to dispel this lie that are linked in the description. It is ironic for the United States to complain about this invasion, since it has invaded over 100 foreign nations as listed by the U.S. Congressional Research Service, briefly described in its booklet entitled Instances of Use of United States Armed Forces Abroad, 1798 to 2023, which is linked in the description. Here are the larger American invasions sparked by border disputes. The United States invaded Canada twice. During the American Revolutionary War in 1775, Americans assumed that if they marched north, the Canadians would join their revolt against the British. They were wrong, as the British called up local militias to help repel the invaders. French Canadians were Catholics and happy with the rights granted by the British to manage their own affairs. They fought the intruders from the south and drove them out of Quebec. By 1812, the Americans had a larger and better trained army. Once war began with Britain, the Americans thought conquering lightly populated British Canada would be easy. Cold weather was a problem, along with a lack of enthusiasm among the American troops. The Canadians fought back until British troops landed southward, so the Americans withdrew to defend their homeland. Allow me to skip over the dozens of American special military operations caused by border disputes with American Indian tribes, as this would take an hour. After the annexation of Texas in 1845, a dispute developed over the actual boundary of Texas. The United States sent Army units into the disputed area to affirm its claim. Mexico responded the same way, resulting in clashes that started a major war. The far more powerful American army didn't just drive the Mexican army out of this contested area. It invaded all of Mexico in a 2-year campaign that killed thousands of Mexicans. After winning, the United States forced Mexico to cede claims to western Texas, Mexico's northern desert area, and valuable California. While the United States was busy conquering its neighboring Confederate States of America during the Civil War, French Emperor Napoleon III took advantage to expand the French Empire into Mexico. French troops invaded Mexico in 1862 to collect overdue debt. After difficult fighting, they captured Mexico City in 1864 and took control of central Mexico. The United States considered Mexico within its sphere of influence, as defined by the Monroe Doctrine, and didn't like military forces from a major world power on its border. Soon after the Civil War ended, American President Ulysses Grant secretly sent arms to Mexican rebels. He dispatched General Philip Sheridan to Texas with 50,000 troops to threaten the French in Mexico. This worried the French, who also faced a possible war with Germany. Napoleon withdrew French troops from Mexico by 1867, and the Mexicans, led by Benito Juarez, regained control. From the beginning of the Mexican Revolution in 1910, the United States launched special military operations into Mexico several times, where the Americans had large mining and oil operations. Over 100,000 soldiers from the United States Army were stationed along the border and on several occasions fought with Mexican rebels or regular Mexican troops who remained angry about the war 70 years prior. In 1914, American President Woodrow Wilson ordered the U.S. Navy to invade and seize the Mexican port city of Veracruz. See the short video linked in the description. American troops remained for 7 months as Wilson hoped to influence politicians in Mexico City and deter the Mexican army from harassing American oil companies and their thousands of American workers. The height of the conflict came in 1916, when revolutionary Pancho Villa attacked the American border town of Columbus, New Mexico. In response, the United States Army, under the direction of General John J. Pershing, launched a huge punitive expedition deep into northern Mexico. Although Villa was not captured, the U.S. Army found and engaged the Villista rebels, killing Villa's 2 top lieutenants. The United States launched smaller operations into Mexican territory against other revolutionary groups until peace prevailed by August 1918. The United States has invaded most of its neighbors in the Caribbean Sea. A dozen videos and tales of the American Empire cover these special military operations. The United States government once considered annexing both Cuba and the Dominican Republic. These invasions are not century-old history. The United States invaded the Dominican Republic in 1965, Panama in 1989, and Haiti in 2004 to replace their governments with obedient puppets. While American troops occupied southern Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s, Vietnamese independence fighters often crossed the borders of neighboring Laos and Cambodia to attack American forces. This led to frequent clashes along these borders. In 1970, the United States launched a huge invasion of eastern Cambodia. This special military operation killed thousands of Vietnamese and Cambodians until the Americans withdrew 3 months later. In recent years, the United States used a border dispute between Iraq and Kuwait as an excuse to invade and occupy all of Iraq. American occupation troops remain in Iraq to this day to preserve its colonial status. In late 2015, American President Barack Obama authorized an unprovoked American invasion of eastern Syria that was mostly ignored by the Western media. See the short video linked in the description. Obama claimed this was needed to stop cross-border terrorism. But the Americans built several permanent military bases and began hauling away stolen Syrian oil and grain to sell on the world market. This special military operation was not authorized by the United Nations nor the U.S. Congress. American occupation forces remain in Iraq and Syria today, while American political leaders express outrage that Russian forces remain in Ukraine. The Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine is just a border dispute caused by NATO expansion and the 2014 American coup that installed a Russian-hating regime in Kiev. The hysteria generated by the American government and its media allies about this conflict is absurd, given America's long history of invading foreign nations. Moreover, Russia's incursion into eastern Ukraine was provoked by the United States, as famous Professor John Mearsheimer explained in 2023.
If you look at Putin's behavior up to February 24th, 2022, and even immediately after the invasion, he is clearly very reticent to get into the war to begin with, and very interested in ending the war as quickly as possible. The idea that Putin is a highly aggressive individual who was bent on conquering Ukraine and turning it into part of a greater Russia is not a serious argument. In fact, I would make the argument that he was too reticent to engage the West militarily along the road to February 24th, 2022. He was doing everything he could to avoid a war. He did not want a war. He understood that this would not be good for Russia. He was not interested in Ukraine, conquering Ukraine. There's not a scintilla of evidence to show that he was interested in conquering Ukraine. This paper that he wrote in July of 2021 that some people point to as evidence that he was bent on creating a greater Russia and that Ukraine was going to be his first conquest, says nothing of the sort. He makes it clear in that document that he recognizes that Ukraine is an independent country and that there's a rich history of good relations between Ukrainians and Russians and that this should be continued in the future. He's not bent on conquering Ukraine. But anyway, the narrative we now have in the West is that he's the second coming of Adolf Hitler, that he's bent on conquering Ukraine. When he's done conquering Ukraine, he's going to go into Poland, the Baltic states, and so forth and so on. This is a laughable argument. There's no evidence to support it.